Hey everyone, so today we're doing a fixed gear build out of this old GT Force. So the bike was sitting around for about a decade, the previous owner thinks. He said it hasn't had much use in the past 20 years or so. It was sitting up in his garage, just hanging up on the wall for a while. So it's collected quite a bit of dust, and there's lichen and stuff growing all over it. It is a nice tinged chromoly tubing frame bike. Just came with RX 100 Shimano components. Heaps of the spokes had broken. It looks like most of them are just rusty. There's no sign of impact or a crash of the bike. So as you can see, it's been sitting around for a really long time. The handlebar tape was just awful. There's cobwebs and dust and some lichen growing on the headset cups and stuff. So I think the seat post is the only non-factory item. I could be wrong. And then it also has this Topic saddlebag. There's only a couple of scratches on the bike. One was on the top tube here. And then the chainstay protector had a few scuffs out of it. So I bought this bike because it has horizontal dropouts. And I just really like old GTs. But this is my first road GT bike. So just going through the saddlebag contents before getting into the build. There's nothing in this lower part, this little extension section. But in the top here, there was a few tools and things. So there was a Topic multi-tool, which is just like a regular Allen key and screwdriver set. Then a few patches, some sandpaper, and even a Topic chain breaker. It is a little bit bent, but would still probably work in a pinch. Then there were just some old Park Tool tire levers. I don't know why there's three. 3 is kind of a strange number to have. Also, the bike came with a pump attached. It looks like it still functions okay. I gave it a quick motion test and then pressured it up against my thumb. So this is quite a large frame, as you can see here, just going by the head tube alone. But then I'm pretty tall as well, so when I jump over it, it seems to shrink a little bit. So this long stem and handlebar combo, it has to go. It just doesn't feel right to me. I prefer like a more upright style. So to add to a bit of comfort on this bike, it can actually fit 32mm tires in the rear. The front clears no problem, but the rear it gets a little tight. So we can probably just modify the frame a little bit and then get those to fit nicely. So stripping the bike apart now, I just throw some WD-40 in through the seat tube just to help get the bottom bracket. I do this first, and then just while I'm pulling everything else apart, it sort of activates and works into the threads a little bit. It's definitely not a penetrating oil, but it can help and it gets most of the bottom brackets out. Normally if it needs penetrating oil, then it's quite stuck anyway. So I go over the chain as well, just to make my chain breaker like me a little bit more. And then cut through the cables and everything, and start pulling off the brakes and stuff. So you can sort of see the paint job a little bit better there. So it does have like a orange metallic flake to it. What? It still has grease on it? Are you kidding me? What? It's been sitting for like a decade or two. So in theory, the headset should come off pretty easily. Yup. That's insane. So going by the fact that there was still grease wedged amongst the coil stem, yeah, the bike was definitely dry stored and pretty well looked after. So it's not that often that a bike comes to me with grease still in the stereo tube of a threaded fork. So most of the time it's just like this funny coloured sludge or something. Or even worse, it's just rusted in. So most of the components came off pretty easily, but I always leave the cranks and bottom bracket, the most stressful component, for last. So the crank belt was quite tight. I guess some of the grease had sort of worn off over the years or just got a bit stuck. But the crank arm itself actually came off pretty nicely. And then I moved over to the non-drive side to try and loosen it off a little bit. Normally the non-drive side gives you a little bit more confidence and better hope to get out the bottom bracket. Normally if the side comes out, then you've got a pretty good shot of getting it out. So once that came loose, I moved back to the drive side and undid that as well. That liquid flowing out was just WD-40 that I sprayed in. Looking inside the frame, you can see a little bit of rust staining there in the down tube. Not really a big deal though. There was a little bit of debris from the sticker that came off the bottom bracket shell. So the bottom bracket cable guide, the screw that goes through normally peels off a little bit of the sticker. Quite a nice fork on this GT. Nice thin blades. It's a spinner stamped fork. So not super amazing, it's just like a Taiwan made. Then stripping the rest of the bike, and then I go through and sort of feel out which stickers I can pull off externally. So I just use like a heat gun to peel them off. Some of the decals and things did have clear coat over the top, but you can normally just run your finger over and sort of feel. So the chainstay protector and the tubing sticker and then that strange warning sticker are the three that I could pull off just with the heat gun. So I tried to be careful when pulling these off because I thought I might be able to put them back on later on, but because the heat gun sort of warps them a little bit and makes it a little bit tricky. So you can sort of either re-stick them down with a different kind of glue, or you can attach them with like a clear vinyl. So you put the clear vinyl over the top of the sticker and then stick that to the frame. So because these decals are under the clear coat, we have to start stripping before we take these off. So I give it a scuff over with some quite coarse sandpaper before using the paint stripper. You can take it to like a sandblaster or media blaster to take off the paint if you want, but this is just the way that I do it, just so I can do it at home basically. So the paint stripper works pretty good. It sort of depends on the paint and sort of the wear and tear on the frame. So because this is quite tidy, it took quite a few layers or coats of paint stripper for it to fully work. So it's really cool to see the raw frame underneath. A lot of the tubing was brazed together, and then the bottom bracket shell, it had like the seat stays and the down tube were welded in. So you can see there the stamped numbers in the bottom bracket shell. I don't know if those are like a serial number or if they're a date or anything, but it's cool to see the 0001 there. So to fit the 32C tires, I'm going to have to dimple in the chainstays a little bit. So I've done this in a previous GT video, but basically I just mark it out. I use a file on the outside of the chainstay just to prevent the outside deforming and bending inwards. And then I just use something like quite durable and steel to dimple it in a little bit, just with some poly grips or shifters or whatever you want to call them. I feel pretty safe dimpling in steel chainstays. I don't think I'd do it with alloy bikes though. So that's a 32C tire there, and it has a little bit of a wobble, so you can see there's plenty of clearance really. Moving on to masking up the frame, I'd use some old bolts and all the bottle cage bolts and everything, and then like some rags in the head tube and seat tube. Then an old bottom bracket, just it's like an unsealed unit, just put that in the bottom bracket shell. And mask up the crown race before giving the bike a wipe down. So the paint that I'll be using on the bike is Spray.bike stuff. So if you haven't checked this out, I'll leave a link in the description. I painted my Specialized hard rock that looks like the stump jumper. I painted that last year and it's held up quite well, so that's why I chose to use it again. They do have quite a range of colours and everything. And some of the styles that you can achieve with this paint is quite nice. So that's just basically why I chose to use this instead of like a regular spray paint. It does sort of powder up though if you're not careful. And then after the primer, I put down a little bit of black, and over that I put the decals on. This is just so I can use them as like a masking form. And then at the end of the bike, or at the end of the paint job, you peel off the decals to reveal the black paint underneath. So I started off using this fluoro pink, but as I got it down, it just didn't look right. So when it was mixed with the purple and the blue, the pink was just too bright. So I actually had some of my Quasar pink that I used on the Specialized bike last year, and I went over it with that, and that pink was just so much nicer. You can see there it's darker, but it's just a more pleasant pink. It's also easier to use compared to the fluoro paint jobs. Their fluoro is quite powdery because it has material in it to reflect light, so it definitely sprays a little bit differently, so just keep that in mind if you're going to use it. You can get it flat, but it's quite powdery. So once all the paint was down and I've got the fades nicely, I peel off all the decals to reveal the black underneath. So I did have a bit of an issue with the top of the GT sticker. Basically it just wasn't pushed down all the way, so a little bit of paint got underneath the decal, so the top of the T is a little bit funky. Over the top of the paint, I wanted to use their cling film or glad wrap crinkle sort of splotching method. It's known as their marble effect. So basically you just spray a little bit of paint in like a cup or plate or something, dab it onto the glad wrap, and then just chuck it all over the frame. So I dab it into the paint and then dab it on the outside just to take off a little bit of the excess. But I'm glad I did like a test can beforehand. So I used 2 different sizes. I used like a smaller size to get in the fork, and then this bigger one on the frame. And then just holding it lightly like that, just to dab it on. This is the end result here. I went over it, I think, twice. The first time it just didn't look like it was enough, and it looked like there was too much colour coming through. Going over quickly with some leftover Kieran flake. This is their multi one, so it has like greens and reds and blues and stuff in it. I'm not using Spray.bike's clear coat. I tested this on one of the test cans, and it worked really nicely. It's a familiar clear coat for me, but if you have like a favorite acrylic clear coat, then just test that on a test can, and then just use that. So building up the rear wheel now, because I got a free bike that had Araya Super Aero rims on it, which are like a nice polished deep rim. I had these rims on another bike in the past. This is the rim here. I had these rims before and I ended up selling them, and I regretted it big time. So I just somehow was scrolling through Marketplace one day and I saw an old free road bike, and I happened to notice the rims on it. So I jumped on that opportunity. I was lucky enough that I managed to pick the bike up. So it did have 105 components on it. So the front wheel is just a 105 hub with the same Araya Super Aero rim. They definitely needed a clean up, so I just used some Autosol and Brasso to clean them up. This is just like a test comparison, so you can see the Brasso on the right hand side of the tape and then Autosol on the left. There's not much difference between the two, so you could use either or really. The Autosol is a bit more abrasive, so I think it would be better at getting some of the deep oxidization and stuff out. So the hub I have for the build is a Surly flip-flop hub, so I can use like a track hog on one side, then single speed on the other if I want to. I decided to paint split the hub just because it was quite plain, and I'll be having silver spokes with the silver rim, and I thought the silver hub would be maybe a little bit too much silver for one wheel. So you can see the comparison before and after. That's just with Autosol and Brasso. So starting the rear wheel build now. I don't go through the whole thing. It would just mean that the video would be like an hour long. So just to save some time, I skip over it. It's definitely a nice skill to have. You can build some some strange custom wheels. So like this, I'm so stoked that I can actually build this array of Super Aero up to the Surly fixed hub. Basically just so I can have 2 of these rims on my bike. I really miss having these. They're quite a nice looking, cool old Japanese item. So if you don't know how to build wheels, I highly recommend just looking into it and giving it a go. The first wheel I built was just like a disassemble of an old mountain bike wheel. And then from there, I built up like ones with new spokes and then sort of swapped hubs and stuff. There's plenty of wheel, like spoke calculators. I get them custom cut from a bike shop sort of down the line a little bit. They're only like $1.50 each spoke with cutting. These are DT Swiss Champion spokes, so they're just a single butted spoke. Plenty strong enough for most of the bikes that I build. And it's really cool that there's a bike store that will cut spokes for me. So you might have noticed earlier that the clear coat that I put on was a clear gloss coat. It didn't actually look that nice. I prefer the sort of matte satin finish. So I went over it with a satin or semi-gloss clear coat, and this gives the finish that I was after. So the handlebars that I'll be using on the build are these Simworks Fun 3 bar. It's a handlebar that has a little bit of rise and quite a bit of back sweep. I think it's about 35 degrees or something like that. Quite a nice handlebar for a commuter or even like a old retro mountain bike. You can see here that I did paint strip a little bit of the bar just to check what was underneath first. So the paint stripper worked really well on this handlebar because it's like a sort of a chrome finish underneath. I don't know if it is technically chrome, but it's certainly a heavily polished finish, so the paint just can't really stick to it that well. So I'm glad that I tested it because I really prefer the silver look of the handlebar. The only thing is the paint stripper sort of oxidizes or stains the chrome finish, but some Autosol just cleans it up really nicely back to that high polish finish. They look really nice once they are stripped. To leave the decals on, I just sort of masked around it, but it didn't work perfectly. So you can see sort of the edges of the decals were a little bit damaged. Moving on to cleaning up the headset, I just used some degreaser in a tub, let them soak for a little bit, and it works really nicely. You can use like a ultrasonic cleaner or even just WD-40 and a brush, and it works quite nice. The headset itself, all the bearing races and everything were in really nice condition, so I can reuse the stock headset. Just use like a little bit of grease to sort of ease the headset cups back into the frame. And then I use this homemade headset press, I guess you'd call it. It's basically just threaded rod with a few washers and a couple of nuts on it. Then just pushing that back into the frame, making sure it's in there nice and good, but without overstressing the head tube. So quickly sort of going over why I'm doing a fixed gear road bike conversion. The biggest thing is basically because of the cost. So a Surly steamroller frame set new here in New Zealand is over $1,000. So I built this whole bike for maybe $400 or under $400. I think I bought the bike for $120. The Surly hub, I got off a bike for about $60. Then obviously the array of Super Aero rims were free. Then I bought the spokes and the handlebar. The handlebar I got second hand, which is why I couldn't select it in silver. Yeah. So for $500 maybe, so under half of what a Surly frame costs new anyway. And then the second-hand market, they hold their value really well because our market's so small. The supply is pretty small, so then the second-hand market, like the prices don't really drop down too much. So another reason why is because I get to build an old GT. So the GT track frames are obviously quite expensive, and then they have really limited tire clearance as well. So this frame I can fit 32C tires, and then like an old track bike, you're really limited to like 25 or 28C most of the time. So tire clearance, cost. I also have 2 bottle cage mounts on this frame, And then some frames do have like rack eyelets, fender eyelets and stuff. This frame doesn't, unfortunately, but I could just use like P-clips or P-clamps if I wanted to mount some anyway. Another big reason is I really like sort of upcycling or customizing bikes. So I feel a bit more free to do what I want with an old road bike frame. So I just wanted to grab this and paint it, make it how I wanted it to be. So the paint job is based on a bike I saw on Instagram. It's by Spray.bikes. The owner is bb.yayareya. I'll put her Instagram link in the description so you can check the bike out. It's a really cool bike. It's got pink rims. Just looks really cool. So I saw that paint job and I thought, oh, I want that. I want that. I thought it was actually quite a bit harder than how it actually is. At first, I didn't actually know how they did the fade with like the marble effect. I thought that the marble, like the color, was over the top of the black. But then after I saw one of their reels, I think it was, I saw that there was actually just paint underneath and then they did the black over the top. So the grips that I chose to use for this bike are ESI Chunky. I really like ESI grips. They're just really comfortable, give heaps of grip, and they just stay where they are supposed to stay, which kind of makes them difficult to get on and off, but I mean, these aren't going to go anywhere anyway. So the front wheel, like I mentioned earlier, it's just a Shimano 105 front hub, laced to the same Area Super Aero. Area? I don't know how to pronounce that properly. If there's any Japanese people or anyone that knows, let me know. That'd be cool. So cleaning it up, it's sort of similar, but basically I just floss between the spokes with some auto sole. That cleans it up for the most part, and then just use some Brasso over the top just to sort of get some of the finer scratches out. Then from here, just cleaning up the inside of the hub. The cones and everything were in pretty good condition, so everything will be reused. No pitting or hard wear lines or anything on the cones or bearing surfaces. So just dropping out the axle and then just using my magnet to get the bearings out. Somebody asked what this magnet was, and it's basically just a homemade thing. It's an old like computer magnet, so off a bicycle computer that attaches to the spokes normally. It's just a magnet from that. It's actually quite a strong one. And then it's like a section of bottle cage with a hole and some JB Weld in it just to hold it all together. And the grease that I use, it's just a waterproof wheel bearing grease. It feels similar and looks similar to the Park Tool one, but it's not. It's just from the local auto store. If you're in New Zealand or Australia, this is the Super Jeep Auto Gulf Western wheel bearing oil. Grease, sorry. It's waterproof and high temperature. Not that we need it to be high temperature, but yeah, this is the grease that I use for most things. So it's quite a nice viscosity. Wheel bearings run really smoothly in it. It's not super slick and it's not super tacky, but it stays in place and provides really good protection. So these are the tires that I'm using on the bike. They are Vittoria Zafiro tires. Just throwing them on quickly. These are just a nice, well-priced tire that I can get locally. This is the chainring I'll be using. I bought this secondhand, but I think it's pretty well new. So it's just a 1/8 track chainring that fits the cranks that I'll be using. Didn't really like the look of it though, so I think I'll be sanding it down and polishing it up. These are just 2 Scotch-Brite pads, starting off with the red one, which I believe is about a 400 grit sandpaper equivalent. Then I went a bit overboard and I decided to drillium it as well. Just using a center punch, then drill, and then I went over and countersunk the outside of the holes as well. The countersink or beveling sort of hides any wonky holes as well, because by making it a little bit bigger, it sort of hides that a little bit. The front brake I'll be using on the bike, the factory one was pretty toasted, not in a good way. The spring was pretty done, and yeah, just every bolt just needed like a vapor rusting. So instead I'm just using this 105 brake that came on that free bike that the wheels came off. It's in a lot better condition. All it just needs is a bit of a clean. I suppose I could have vapor rust it, but not really necessary when some of the things I can just replace. I'm also using the SLR brake cover. I don't know what you call this, like the badge or emblem off the RX100 brake, just sticking that onto the 105 brake. I did actually put this on the wrong spot. I thought that the quick release pivot was all the way down, but it wasn't, so I didn't realize that until editing all this footage. So with the brake activated or with cable tension on, it will clear the tire, but once you release it, it drops. So I guess if the brake cable snaps, then the brake arms will come into contact with the tire, but considering it's quite a slick tire with not much surface or contact area to the brake, I don't think it would cause any issues. It'll probably just slow the bike down, which could be a good thing. It's like like a safety brake if the brake cable snaps. So these are the cranks that I'll be using on the bike. They're an old Sakai CR crank arm. Got a really cool look to them. They just showed up second hand. And the BCD that I needed for the chainring I've got. They look really cool. It's like this offset sort of shuriken star. I don't know how to say. It just looks really cool. Anyway, taking the crank arm or the chain rings off. Obviously, it was a 2x road setup. They also come in a triple in this style, but the spider is a bit smaller, so it looks different. And then just going over the cranks with some autosol. They needed a good cleanup. They were actually in pretty good condition, but obviously to match the chainring and some of the other components on the bike, they needed polishing. So I don't go over the cranks with clear coat, but some of the other components that I polish up I do. But most of the time I just leave them raw and then either wax them and periodically clean them or not. So you can see there I put the decals back on. That's just with some clear vinyl over the top. Then moving on to fit the bottom bracket. This is the standard one. For some reason it's really skinny, 107 millimeters. So sort of the lowest average seems to be 110. So I don't know if this is like a strange one that just GT used. But 107 millimeters for a square taper bottom bracket is quite short. So just quickly tightening it down, just test fitting things. Something to look out for when doing a fixed gear conversion. Obviously you want the chain ring in quite sucked to the frame, and then checking out the chain line by just throwing in the rear wheel and eyeballing it. You can do some measurements, but the eyeball method works pretty good too. The cog that I'll be using on the bike is a local product from Spray.bike. I got their coated cog because I'll be using it for commuting and stuff. And they also stock these Runwell track nuts, which are really cool. So to make the hub fit in the frame, because the frame is about 126 millimeter spacing, and it's a 120 millimeter hub, I just use like a little bit of extra washers because there's so much axle that I can easily fit that and it's fine. So threading on the cog, these go on a normal way if you've never installed one before, and then you just secure it down like as tight as you can, and then throw on the lock ring, which is reverse threaded. So you just use like a little bit of grease on the threads just to ensure that they torque up nicely. They say to tighten it down and then take it up a steep hill, and then that'll sort of cinch the cog down a little bit more, and then just make sure everything's tight from there. So retighten the lock ring and stuff. So in order to fit the chain in like a nice spot so that the wheel fits in the dropout nicely, it's not too far back or forward, I used one half link out of a BMX half link chain. And that worked really nicely. You can see it there like rotating around. This just made sure that I still had like fore and aft adjustment if I needed it. These are just some old road pedals, KKT Pro Vic 2 pedals. I've had these before and I quite like them. These ones, I think the side part comes a little bit too high, so I might have to modify that. And just using some Zephyr Christoph straps, because they're available locally. I think I might change to some double straps, just to see how that goes. But I do really like toe clips with straps, compared to like the Velcro, or whatever they're called. Like the fixed gear track straps, don't know what you call them, but you know what I'm talking about. And I just had these Sakai crank caps sitting around, so I thought I'd just throw them on, see how they looked. This is just like a little bit of clear vinyl that I thought I'd show. This is just to prevent water sort of building up and getting into that brake bridge. One of the last things to do was to replace the seat post binder bolt and seat post and seat as well. So the seat post that came on it actually had like a little bit of a wobble to it. So it was a little bit too small. So I found a 27.2 seat post that fits really nicely. I polished it up and then chucked this Brooks seat on. This is a Brooks B17. People think that they're quite hard. I think it just really sort of depends on your butt and stuff. You can see there's a little bit of toe overlap. So this is the full build now. I'll just throw like a little bit of B-roll in, and then I'll be taking it out for a bike ride, and then I'll check back in later. Sorry about, I feel like I was rambling like this whole video. Just so much to talk about and so many thoughts and stuff. Yeah. I'll see you at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. See you in a bit. Baby wheelies! All the puddles. So definitely way less traction, like so much less traction than the 26-inch Giant fixed gear bike. So the Giant is built up now instead of the Peugeot that you saw in the last video. And this is faster. Wow, so much faster. Zoom, zoom, zoom. The shoe. The shoe is squeaking. That's pretty fucking funny. Classic. Here we go. We knock it. Oh, yeah. You're in the pedestrian crossing. You're in the pedestrian crossing. Oh, you're so angry. Instant defense knows guilty as. Northwestern Pass on my way home. It's a beautiful day to ride a bike. So a quick explanation about that. Quite a few people roll over the pedestrian crossing and sometimes even the cycleway crossing there. So I normally just tell people, also point and then they back up. Morning. That person, she was sitting there and I guess she was a bit hangry. She decided to eat in the pedestrian crossing. So her rear tires were actually in front of the line that she was supposed to stop at, or on the line that she was supposed to stop behind. So she was way too far forward, and then she just got angry. But yeah, you just got to sort of move on from these things and just continue to enjoy the rest of your ride. Sort of just let them stew in their cage. The rest of the bike ride was really nice. The 49/18 gearing, I think it's about 70 or 72 gear inches. I calculated it to be with the 32C tyre. It worked out really nice for my commute. I think that gearing is quite spinny. I'd certainly top out on flats and downhills and stuff, but it gets me up the hills, which is the main thing for me. So I can still enjoy it as a commuter bike rather than struggling or breaking my knees or something. I actually set a personal best up Simon Street in town in Auckland CBD. Doggos. Oh, yeah. So yeah, rings true that fixed gears, they have some magic going on in the drivetrain where they give you like a little bit of a boost. I don't know if it's the like drivetrain momentum or whatever, but heaps of fun to ride as a commuter bike. If you haven't tried fixed gear riding, I highly recommend it, even just to sort of try it out. The road bike conversion is definitely like more feasible, easy to access for most people compared to like buying an outright fixed gear bike, unless I guess you find something cheap. If you have like a flooded or saturated market, then that might be cheaper to buy already built one for you. But this is probably the cheapest and nicest way for me. Certainly not the cheapest. Like you could just buy some really cheap high tensile steel off the shelf fixed gear bike, but this is a really nice tan steel chromoly frame. Gives like the best of both worlds. So I have like some pretty nice wheels on it, some pretty cool components like handlebar and stuff, without being like, breaking the bank. So the rest of the ride now, I'll shut up for a bit and I'll see you a bit later. Fancy a cone, mate? Yeah. Paddle. Yeah, paddle. Down. Morning.
Hey, another cyclist. I need a bell. A ding 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 ding. On your right. Hiya. Hiya. Then we go left in here towards the Avondale Park. There's a little hill here. It's not really that bad. It's pretty short. But it gets a bit slippery because it's quite sheltered from the sun, so lichen stuff builds up on it. So they have to water blast every now and then. And down the other side. That little crossing, cross the road, go left and then turn right into this. This is quite grippy and it's all holes, so pretty good traction even in the wet for now anyway, and they're replaceable panels, so looking out towards the Waitakere Ranges over Avondale and Newland and stuff. Nice little spin up the hill. Just to get enough momentum to get up and over. Our Tesla's been there for a hot minute. Hook around a couple of corners and see if we could do some skids. Oh, there's a person there. Yeah. Still missing. Poor kitty cat. Hiya. Hello.
So this is just coming now into a velodrome that's quite close to my house.
It's kind of weird actually.
It's an outdoor velodrome that's known locally as the Bumpy Velodrome. This is in Olympic Park in New Lynn, if anyone's curious, in Auckland.
So you do have to be careful up on the left.
They just always leave the gate open and just take a little rip around if you want.
A bit mossy, sorry.
One of the corners has quite a bit of lichen on it, so it gets a bit slippery at times if you're not careful. So that wraps up the video
Just
pretty
another
much.
imposter.
I feel like I was talking the whole time, but I probably
Going to
missed a
be able
bunch
to
of
squeaks.
information.
Sorry.
But yeah, really happy with how the bike came out. It's so much fun to ride. Feels so nice. The fork has like a bit of flex to it, and the 32C tires
That's
soak
about
up some
maxed out.
vibration and stuff. It probably would be better with mud guards, but I kind of like the look of it without them.
It's definitely about maxed out.
And it would probably be pretty hard to fit them anyway because of the tight clearances with the
Yeah, I can't
32C
remember where the
tires.
moss mainly is, yeah. So the moss is
But
down
yeah, this
low,
is how I'll leave the bike
and
for
then
the
it
time
slopes to
being.
up top.
I might change up the gearing at some point. I could probably go a little bit higher, but we'll just see how it goes. It is nice getting up the hills and stuff. Really happy with the paint job. Really, it just needs like some stickers and stuff to finish it off. And I think I might go over some little things with paint pen and stuff to add like a little bit more detail. But otherwise, I'm really happy with the look of the bike. How it rides, it's just amazing. So stoked that the wheels came out how they did. So this is probably the next candidate for a build. It's an old Healing Shogun that I'm going to make into like a sort of track lacrosse, cyclocross bike. Just for fun, really. Going to throw some knobby tires on it. Either this or a Gary Fisher 26-inch mountain bike build. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I probably missed a bunch of information, but I'm happy to answer questions as I go. So thanks for checking the video out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!